Well, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese are rewarding a terrorist group for killing Jews. Israel is currently battling a defensive war to eliminate Hamas for slaughtering entire families, depriving children of their futures and leaving babies orphaned. Yet it's because of this war against the terrorists that Wong and Albanese have decided it's the right time to say that the pathway to peace is to recognise a Palestinian state internationally. Never mind the fact that those in control of Gaza don't want a two-state solution. They want the destruction of Israel. They don't want Jews to exist at all. This is who Penny Wong and her subservient Prime Minister are siding with. They also demand an immediate ceasefire, which would mean Israel lays down its arms while Hamas, the barbaric terror group that raped and slaughtered women and children and babies, stays in control of the Palestinians and rebuilds. This is warped thinking, an absurd absence of logic. How can Labor move to recognise a Palestinian state when Hamas is still in control? Well, Penny Wong makes a point of saying Hamas can't have a future role in Gaza, but then she also calls for an immediate ceasefire. She can never answer the question about how exactly Israel should get rid of Hamas if it lays down its arms with a permanent ceasefire.
So how do you remove Hamas from Gaza without a ground operation, in your view?
The question here is international humanitarian law and making sure that Israel complies with international humanitarian law.
And she prattled on about Israel not invading Rafah, where Hamas has retreated to, but she could never answer the question. Foreign affairs expert Greg Sheridan called Penny Wong's speech last night emotionally manipulative and substantially dishonest. And he recalls how Israel has, on 3 separate occasions, offered the absolute maximum that could conceivably be achieved in a Palestinian state. He writes in The Australian that senior officials from Bill Clinton's administration, in exhaustive memoirs, document how the Palestinian leadership, which lives splendidly well while its people suffer, rejected every such offer and constructed absurd demands that made it impossible. Yet Penny Wong's colleagues were out in force to back her up today. Not one of them criticised her. Not one Labor MP came out to criticise Penny Wong. Is there anyone left in federal Labor who still supports Israel? And if so, well, where are they? The coalition, however, did call out Wong and Albo's absolute nonsense.
If you come out and say the solution to this is an independent Palestinian state, you're simply rewarding the actions of terrorists.
Hamas is in charge in the Gaza Strip, and a decision like this by Australia, watched from that region, will be seen, I believe, only as emboldening the terrorists.
This is giving a public relations victory to Hamas for what they did on the 7th of October. The timing is all wrong.
And Simon Birmingham said that Penny Wong is acquiescing to terrorists. He says the timing of her speech is reckless, writing in an analysis piece that rather than putting pressure on Hamas to change course and agree to release the hostages it has held since October 7, the Albanese government is choosing to instead signal to Hamas that their pressure is helping to get a policy change they want. Birmingham writes that it is downright dangerous to reward such barbaric conduct with a one-sided fast track to recognition of statehood. Now, one of the more offensive things about Penny Wong's speech last night is that she put Hamas and Israel in the same category. Have a listen.
It isn't okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of Hamas. And it is not okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of the Netanyahu government.
As if the Netanyahu government and Hamas are comparable. One is a prescribed terror organisation that murdered, burnt, slaughtered and beheaded babies, children, women and men in the most depraved manner we've witnessed this century. The other is a democratically elected government that, while it's not perfect, although it's probably better than the Albanese government, but not perfect, it apologises for its mistakes and is accountable for its actions. So let's just listen to that again. Penny Wong basically comparing Hamas with Israel because clearly in her mind there are similarities.
It isn't okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of Hamas. And it is not okay to blame anyone in Australia for the actions of the Netanyahu government.
And by the way, no Jews or any other Australians are blaming fellow Australians for Hamas's actions. That's just not happening. Yet there are many pro-Palestinian activists engaging in horrific racism against Jews. And I can't even say it's because of the actions of the Netanyahu government, because this animosity started on October 7, right after the terror attacks. That Opera House protest was October 9. We've been experiencing racism simply because Jews in Israel were attacked by terrorists. We're experiencing racism simply for living. Now, for a long time, we've called out the Albanese government for showing zero leadership on anti-Semitism, for allowing it to fester and grow and cause insecurity in the lives of Australian Jews and their families. But now it's worse than a lack of leadership. Penny Wong and Albanese, their rhetoric is now fanning the flames of anti-Semitism. Australia has no impact on Israel's military response to Hamas, none. But Penny Wong and Albanese do have an impact on social cohesion here in Australia. And they're making the racism against hardworking Jews who contribute to Australian society far worse. They need to take responsibility for this anti-Semitism, and instead they're exacerbating it. And if you question this, well, have a look exactly who Penny Wong has given credibility to by posing in photographs with him and meeting him in her office. It's the head of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network, Nasser Mashni. Well, today, Nasser Mashni actually compared Hamas to Nelson Mandela. He said the problem in the Middle East wasn't Hamas. The problem, he said, are the Zionists, the Jews. Because he says the Jews should really be living in Germany, not on his land. Have a look at this.
Israel does have a government, it's elected though. I'm asking you about Hamas, and I've asked you a couple of times. Is it a fair enough caveat to have Hamas, which does believe Jewish people should not exist?
Nelson Mandela spent 27 years on Robben Island. He only came off the US terrorist list, I think just before he died or just after he died. You know, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist.
One man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist? No. Nelson Mandela did not decapitate soldiers or burn babies. Do we need to show Nasser Mashni the footage of babies killed in their tiny cots again? But it gets worse. Have a look.
What we need to do is move beyond this fascination or infatuation with Hamas, 186 days now after this uptick in the genocide, and start talking about Hamas is not the problem. The problem is Zionism, is settler colonialism, is a supremacist ideology that says a Jewish homeland has to come at the expense of the indigenous people. We have to move past time of these notions of Hamas.
So he says the problem is Zionism. Well, Zionists, by the way, are Jewish people who support Israel. I'm a proud Zionist, and so are 90% of Jews. So he's saying that Jews are the problem. And did you notice how he said we need to stop this fascination with Hamas 186 days after the uptick in genocide? And he's speaking about a so-called Israeli genocide there. He's not referring to the Hamas attack against Israel on October 7. Yet Penny Wong, Australia's foreign minister, gives credibility to this despicable character. It's this crowd that Labor is pandering to with its rhetoric and its policies. Federal Labor under Penny Wong's control and Albanese's weak leadership is morally corrupt. It has sacrificed its support for Australian Jews and has betrayed Australia's long-standing bipartisan friendship with Israel. It doesn't care about the safety of Jewish families or children. It doesn't care about principles because it has none left. As Simon Birmingham noted today, before the 2022 election, Labor promised the Australian Jewish community there would be no difference between the major parties on matters relating to the Middle East. Well, that commitment was blatantly false. It's yet another broken promise from a broken government.